Assalamu alaikum to all our listeners. In case you all haven't noticed recently, we've had some considerable improvements to our audio quality. This is thanks to donations via our Patreon page, which we've used to reinvest into the podcast and into our software, our hardware, and our microphone equipment. And inshallah wa ta'ala, we're hoping to expand and improve more. And that is entirely through donations. We're, as you probably are aware, non-for-profit. So inshallah, if you have the capacity to help out, if you're a fan of Boys in the Cave and you're excited for the future, we have a lot of things coming, then please inshallah donate to us via Patreon so we can continue to improve for your benefit and for the benefit of the ummah, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. My name is Sanz and I'm joined by my co-host Josh. Alhamdulillah, we're joined by someone very special today. His name is Justin Parrott. So he has a bachelor in physics and English from Ottabayan University, MLIS from Kent State University, major research in Islamic studies from University of Wales, and he's currently research librarian for Middle East Studies at NYU in Abu Dhabi, and he's also a research fellow for Yaqeen Institute. So assalamu alaikum, Justin. Welcome to Boys in the Cave.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Just before everyone gets immensely confused about what's happened to Josh's voice, you're joined by Raphael today.
Did I say Josh?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you said Josh.
Did I?
Yeah, you did. 100%.
Oh, okay. Whoops.
Yeah.
I think it's
I think it's because it would have become obvious anyway.
Yeah, I have to copy paste the intro. But anyways, sorry about that. But hope you're doing well, Justin, all the way from Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Actually, I think the one time I did go Abu Dhabi, it was for like, I think 6 hours. I had to stay in transit to go to Bangladesh because the plane tickets were cheaper going that route. So that's how Bengalis roll.
Yeah, it's a hub.
It's a long way out of the way. But no, it's winter over there at the moment, so it must be nice and pleasant compared to, in the middle of the summer in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's almost perfect weather for me. Not too cold. I can go outside without a jacket. And a really good time to go to the beach at this time. But then in a few months, inshallah, it's going to get really hot.
Yeah, well, whereabouts are you from originally in the States? What kind of...
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio, and I did my undergraduate at Otterbein University, which is outside of Columbus, Ohio. And I had been working as a teacher and then as a librarian, as a para-librarian until 2013. And I moved to Abu Dhabi and I took up my current position. So I've been here about 6 years since then.
Well, that's a big change from Ohio, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That's a big adjustment to make. But no, that's interesting. And so was it kind of like, when did you accept Islam? What year was that?
Yeah, so I accepted Islam. I became a Muslim when I was 20 years old, which was back in 2004. And
that's rough age now.
Yeah, that's my age. So it seems to be a common age for converts, I think, around the 18 to 21 bracket.
Yeah, people are trying to settle on their life values and what they believe in, what they're going to live, what philosophy they're going to live for the rest of their lives. So 20 years old is about that time. So at that time, I had been researching all of the religions, and I read the Quran, and then that's what spoke to me, and that's what I decided to settle upon. And I went to the masjid and became a Muslim, and have been learning Islam ever since. Alhamdulillah. So that's the story in a nutshell.
Well, I think probably one of your great contributions, and it is the kind of direction of your paper, is discussing the kind of what you would call nowadays the spiritual dimension of the Islamic religion, which I think obviously whilst theology, whilst Islamic law are of the utmost importance, a lot of people might argue that the kind of spiritual dimension that, we would call in the tradition ihsan, spiritual excellence, is kind of neglected somewhat in modern Islamic teaching, some might say.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And the reason for that, I believe, is because the law and the outward aspects of the religion are easier to study. They're easier to understand. It's very concrete. How many prayers you say a day, how much you give in zakat, and it can all be calculated. And so it's easy for people to sort of like latch on and to uh, look at the outer aspects of the religion, and then the inner aspects of the religion, they're more esoteric. They can be harder to explain, and they can be kind of subjective, because in the sense that somebody has to experience the esoteric reality of the religion to be able to know what our scholars were talking about when they were describing these spiritual states of mind and things like that. So I do think it's something neglected, but I think it's kind of normal, because you sort of have to learn the outward part of the religion first before you can get into the deeper stuff.
Absolutely. It's otherwise you end up kind of, there are a lot of people nowadays who, and I think we'll get into it a bit further along, but there are a lot of people nowadays in the West who actually adopted kind of aspects of Islamic spirituality, but not adopted Islam. It's kind of there's a lot of circles around here. They call them like Sufi circles and stuff, although it's very distant from kind of the classical Sufism of the Muslim scholars. It's almost like they do like zikr groups that are more like, very akin to New Age kind of religions.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, I mean, a lot of stuff that gets imported into the West from, the East, and it's kind of stripped down and, made into something else. And I think some people have done that with Sufism. So people who say they're Sufis, but they're not Muslims. So there is kind of that. But, our religion is comprehensive. It has an outward component and it has an inward component. And I think to be a complete, good practicing Muslim, you kind of have to have all of that together. At least,
absolutely. And even to follow the kind of outward aspects of the religion, you need some of the commandments. To follow them, you need to be in a kind of spiritual state to be able to do it properly. Like one of the injunctions of the Prophet ﷺ was to love for your brother what you love for yourself. And I know most of us living, Muslim, it would be very difficult to just wake up and be able to do that. It takes a great deal of self-work to be able to become someone who wants the best for other people, as opposed to themselves. And another one that I think Sheikh Hamza Yusuf mentions is smiling when it's a sunnah to smile, but smiling when you don't want to smile is particularly difficult.
Right.
And so to follow these kind of sunnah and to follow certain, outward laws of the religion, you in order to do so, you need to be in a kind of spiritual state to fulfill these kind of aspects as well. So that's why it's also of fundamental importance that this dimension of the religion, and as you mentioned, it is a comprehensive religion, but this dimension as well is some people would say at the heart of it.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And I like that you mentioned that hadith, because actually that hadith was the focus of my thesis when I did my Master of Research. And you can find this online. It's on my website. It's called The Golden Rule in Islam. And I documented all of the hadith and the Quran and tafsir where that idea is mentioned, and how important that is of like wishing well for others and treating people as you would like to be treated. That's a huge spiritual piece that is a part of our religion. I feel that that's neglected, and that's why I wrote so much about it. But yeah, that's another big inward piece, and it has to all come together. Your body, your heart, and your mind all got to come together to be a good Muslim.
Do you think it's neglected because it's difficult? Would you put it down to that first and foremost, or why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think it. Well, yeah. First of all, it's difficult because it's easy to love for your parents what you love for yourself, love for your friends what you love for yourself. It's easy to do that. It's not easy to do that to somebody who has wronged you, and to be forgiving of them and to be merciful of them. That's a test, and so that part is difficult. And then I think another part of it is that political discourse in the modern age is very polarized, and if you kind of show any type of reconciliation, or you kind of show any kind of sympathy towards the other side, it's considered treason. So there's a hyper political environment where you're not allowed to give the other side any kind of room. So then that makes it difficult to reconcile with them or to view them as people like yourself. So there's that aspect of it too. And it's just something that's very difficult. Actually, one of the Salaf, and I documented this in my thesis, that he said I had to strive to love for my brother what I love for myself. It was a jihad for him. He had to put effort into it. So it's definitely can be difficult.
Yeah, it's certainly not something that a great many Muslims are really putting as much effort into as they are into certain other political ventures and so on and so forth. But I suppose one of the sort of particular aspects of this, and it's something that you touch upon a lot, is the role of mindfulness in Islamic spirituality. So, muraqabah. And I think mindfulness, and it's something that even my parents who aren't religious talk about, how all spirituality really and all spiritual traditions have at their core a kind of doctrine of mindfulness, in order being watchful of your actions. Because if you're not watchful of your actions, you can't really change yourself. You can't really learn about what your problems are. And I think the core of loving your brother what you love for yourself is, and actually making that a jihad, is being aware first and foremost that you do have a certain state, that you do certain things, and having the agency to think and change about that, and think about that and change it. And the center of that obviously is al-muraqabah. So could you just like sort of elucidate the concept of it in the Islamic tradition? So is it like a ritualistic thing that you have to train in yourself, or is it something that, you just resolve to be a little more mindful, or is there something specific that's set out, like a dhikr or something like that?
Yeah. So let me just start by talking about what mindfulness is in the Western positive psychology tradition. So just to give you background, why this is a kind of a big deal that people are talking about, not just Muslims. Mindfulness is defined as metacognition, or awareness of your own thought processes and awareness of your feelings, awareness of your surroundings, and things like that. So the American Psychological Association, they have a page on mindfulness, and it has the studies with all the benefits that go in with that. Now, in the Western psychology tradition, they've secularized it, of course, because they have to make it appeal to a diverse, pluralistic society. So they don't include the theological component, but our tradition does, because our tradition is obviously theocentric. It's all based upon Allah. So I'll give you the definition of muraqabah as it was given by Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. He said there was 4 components of muraqabah, and the number 1 is to know and to be aware of Allah. Number 2, to know and be aware of shaitan. Number 3, to know and be aware of the soul's capacity for evil, or your nafs capacity to urge you to do evil. And number 4 is to know what deeds are righteous and what deeds you should be doing. And this, other scholars have said that this muraqabah, in this comprehensive sense, is equal to ihsan. So, as ihsan is defined in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that ihsan, or spiritual excellence, is to worship Allah as if you see Him. So that means, like to worship Allah with perfect awareness, right? Perfect awareness of Allah, being aware of you, of what shaitan is doing, of what your own nafs is doing, and then that what you're doing is sanctioned by the religion, both inwardly and outwardly. So that's the sort of the comprehensive definition of muraqabah in the Islamic tradition. And Imam al-Ghazali and Ibn al-Qayyim both devoted sections of muraqabah in their books. So it's something that they elucidate on. I cite those in my paper, and you can go back and look at those sections if you can read Arabic. That's the definition that I've been using, and that the one I documented.
So practically speaking, for our audience, I mean, many of us might have heard, not been aware about these kinds of esoteric dimensions of the religion, and so now they might resolve to think, okay, this is all making a great deal of sense. I wish to become a more mindful Muslim. What would you teach them, or what would you tell them, and what is the wisdom of the scholars in how to start growing your capacity for mindfulness in an Islamic kind of sense?
Okay, great. I have a lot to say about this. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So first, let's talk about meditation. So meditation comes from the Latin root, which just means to think. So meditation is any kind of mental activity. And there's different kinds of meditation. And these are in Islam. This is mentioned by Ibn al-Qayyim. He talks about several words that we have in Islam for mental activity, like tafakkur is this reflection, tadakkur is recalling, remembering, ta'ammul, this is the what is used in modern Arabic for meditation. Tadabbur is another word for reflecting, contemplating, and istibsar, so looking for insights. So I mentioned in the article, he has all of these words for different types of meditation. Now, Al-Ghazali, he recommends that we do al-wadha'if al-arba'a. So these 4 spiritual practices that we should do every day. This is in addition to the 5 daily prayers and the sunnah prayers and so on. He says 4 things we need to do every day. There's dua, supplication. There's dhikr, remembering Allah. Qira'at is reciting the Quran. And then fikr, like contemplation. That's like studying Islam and gaining knowledge and things like that. So when I was looking at the way Al-Ghazali described and prescribed dhikr, that to me seemed to be the closest practice to what people call mindfulness meditation today. So what Al-Ghazali tells you to do, and this is in the last section of my paper, is that he says, when you go to make dhikr, you go into your room, you make it silent, and you're going to be focusing on one thing, and that's to have your mind on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. You're not going to be thinking about the future. You're not going to be thinking about the past or thinking about something elsewhere. You're going to be in the present with Allah, being aware of Allah, remembering Allah, reflecting on Allah's names, or saying a lot of the dhikrs that we have, dhikr statements that we have. So the idea is that you want to bring your awareness to Allah. So you want to be in that state of muraqabah, and that you want to become comfortable in that state. And then when you were out of that state, you will be more aware than when you were going along. So I look at it as a practice, kind of as like an exercise, right? So there was a study on meditation by Gail Desbordes in 2012 in the journal Frontiers of Human Neuroscience. And she demonstrated that people who meditated and did this mindfulness meditation over 8 weeks, that there was parts of their brain had changed. And so outside of the meditative practice, their brains, they were more focused and so on. And they had these different mental benefits. So I view this dhikr practice that Al-Ghazali is talking about, it's like doing a push-up. It's like it's like jogging. The more you do it, the stronger you get at it. And the more you can have presence and awareness before Allah in this practice of yours, the more you will have it in other parts of your life, in salat and during the Jumu'ah prayer, during your classes and so on. And I found that when I did this, and I've been doing this for a while, I found it a lot more easier to focus on the sermon. Sometimes we're listening to the sermon and your mind just kind of goes off on a tangent. When I've been doing my dhikr meditation, my mindfulness meditation, I catch myself doing that a lot easier, and I'm able to have a lot more focus in the Jumu'ah prayer and in the prayers in general. So that's kind of the practical aspect of it. Go ahead.
Sorry, go on. No, I was just going to say, it's really interesting you mentioned that, and how important these kinds of dhikr is to your entire mental and cognitive and spiritual state. And it was really interesting. I remember reading a hadith a while ago, and I later found out that it was actually from, I think, your website, and it's in Tirmidhi. And Abdullah ibn Busr reported that a man said, "Oh, Messenger of Allah, the injunctions of Islam are too many for me. So tell me something I can hold on to." And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Keep your tongue wet with the remembrance of Allah."
Yes.
And so it's incredibly important, because of all the things in Islam that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam invited him to, Obviously, there's the four pillars, but apart from all of that, the first thing he told this man to hold on to was dhikr.
Now, yes. So let me elaborate a little bit more about the practice. So first, we need to talk about the virtue of silence. So we talk about silence and we think of it outwardly, like, speak good or remain silent, like the hadith says. But there's an inward type of silence because we talk to ourselves, right? And that can be harmful. So if we're talking to ourselves in a bad way, we're talking bad to ourselves, that's something that's harmful to us and that we have control over and we need to stop. So there was one of the early Muslims, his name was Abu Bakr al-Farisi. He was asked about samt as-sir. So what is the silence of the soul, or like the silence of the inner being? And he, rahimahullah, said it is to abandon preoccupation with the past and the future. In other words, it's to be present, right? Because if you're thinking about the future, you're talking to yourself about the future. If you're thinking about the past, you're talking to yourself about the past or what's happening elsewhere. So, and this is why for people, for example, have anxiety, because they're worried about the future. They're going over the worst case scenarios in their head about what's going to happen in the future and everything like that. So what mindfulness does is it helps you kind of ignore those thoughts and then get back to the present moment where you're more calm and you're less likely to be anxious. So there's several points I want to make. So let me just make this point. So your mind has two components to it. You have the thinking mind and you have the observing mind. So if you're thinking, that's your rational thoughts. You're talking to yourself, you're having a conversation inside yourself, or you are observing and you're aware and you're taking in sensory information. Okay. So if you were on the beach, there's so much to take in. There's the feeling of the sand. There's the sound of the water. There's the smell of the sea air. There's the beautiful sunset maybe, and there's the breeze and everything. And if you're sitting there and you're present, you're taking in all that sensory information. And when your mind is focused on that, you're not going to be worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or what's going to happen, or you're not going to be sad about what happened before if you're just present in that moment. So your mind you're able to think or you're able to observe, and those two aspects don't overlap very well. And so what mindfulness meditation does is it helps us to be able to strengthen that brain muscle to be able to switch between thinking and observing, thinking and awareness at our choosing, and not just as the mind is going on a whim, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. I can keep going.
Yeah, please do. This is incredible.
Great. So, alhamdulillah.
I'm doing a lot of thinking right now, and not as much observing. But
okay,
there's a lot to take in.
So let's talk about the dhikr practice. So part of the dhikr practice is to be able to notice your thoughts as they kind of how I explained, they bubble up from inside and they get into that top part of your brain. So As-Suyuti, he mentions that there are 5 stages of thought. There's al-hajis, which is the fleeting thought. There's al-khatir, that's the actual thought that you are aware of. Then the third stage of thought is hadith and nafs, right? And that's the self-talk. That's the talking to yourself, right? That's you're consciously talking to yourself. And then it becomes al-ham, it says you make a decision, and then it becomes al-azam, a determination to do something. So thoughts they kind of grow into this 5 stages. So when you're doing your dhikr there and it's silent and you're trying to focus on Allah, the thoughts are going to come up. That's natural, right? So you have a hajis, it's coming up, it becomes a khatir, and then you have hadith and nafs, and you're talking to yourself and like, oh, what am I going to eat to dinner tomorrow? What am I going to eat for breakfast? And then you realize you're talking to yourself, and I don't want to be talking to myself right now. I want to be doing dhikr. So I say alhamdulillah, or I say subhanallah, or astaghfirullah. I use one of these dhikrs, and this dhikr is called an anchor. In mindfulness meditation, it's called an anchor because it brings you back to your awareness, to that center ground. And actually, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned something like this in the hadith. So we probably all heard that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that he would say astaghfirullah 70 times a day, right? Or in some narrations 100 times a day. And in one of these narrations, there's different wordings, but in one of these, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that sometimes he has a fog over his heart, so he says astaghfirullah, right? And so, and Nawawi, this is in Sahih Muslim, and Nawawi comments on that. He says the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like any human being, would experience ghafla. Ghafla is the opposite of mindfulness. You get distracted by something. You're human beings. So he would get distracted, and then so he would say astaghfirullah, and that would bring him back to his state of remembrance and his state of mindfulness. So when you're doing this dhikr meditation, you can pick an anchor. There's all these different dhikrs from the Sunnah, but the idea is to sit there, observe your mind, observe the thoughts as they come up, and then once you start talking to yourself, you say astaghfirullah or alhamdulillah or la ilaha illallah or anything like that that's going to bring you back to your state of mindfulness. And then this anchor that you're using in your practice, this can be used when you're outside of your practice. So when you're in daily life and then you realize you've been distracted and become in a state of ghafla, in a state of unmindfulness, then you can say astaghfirullah, and it will bring you back into that state of mindfulness because your mind has associated that state of mindfulness with the word. Okay, so that's part of how that works. And so the other idea is that we have the misconception that thoughts are something that we have to suppress or that we have to push down or that we have to fight back against. Like shaitan is whispering to us and we have to fight him, right? And to do like that. But actually that's not how thoughts work. So I liken it to like waves on the ocean. Like thoughts are like waves. They come and go. They come and go. They come and go. But if you start hitting the wave with a stick, you're just going to be making more waves, right? You're not actually going to be getting rid of the wave. So that's like a thought. So if you have a bad thought and you start talking to yourself about this bad thought, you're just giving more oxygen to the bad thought, right? You need to be able to observe that thought, recognize it, then turn away from it using your anchor, using your dhikr, and then let that thought just float away. So Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim both have two kind of ways of explaining this. So Ibn Taymiyyah says that if there was a shepherd and the shepherd had a dog and the dog was attacking you, this dog is on a leash. He said, don't fight the dog. Don't go attacking the dog. You would appeal to the shepherd to take the dog away from you, right? So what he's saying there is that, okay, maybe I'm sitting there and doing my dhikr and shaitan is whispering to me this really bad thought. Instead of talking to yourself about that thought and saying to yourself, I'm so bad for thinking that, how could I do that? You just say, alhamdulillah, or say your dhikr, and you come back to that mindfulness, to your awareness of Allah, and then that thought will just kind of float away. So that's the illustration he does. And then Ibn al-Qayyim kind of says something similar. He says, rahimahullah, that passing thoughts are not harmful in themselves. Like everyone's going to have bad thoughts. Everybody's going to get whispers from shaitan, but you don't have to act on them, right? But these passing thoughts are not harmful. They're only harmful if you go after them and you engage in them. And it's hadatha. It's like hadith an-nafs. It's like you talk to yourself about these thoughts, right? So he said this thought, you just treat it like you're the passerby on the road. You're just walking past somebody on the road. If you start talking to them, they're going to talk back to you, right? But if you don't talk to them, they're going to keep going. So he says that's what thoughts are like. So the idea when we're doing dhikr meditation is that we want to be recognized, be mindful of when we start talking to ourselves about thoughts. And, outside talking to yourself about thoughts, that's fikr. That can be good in a certain context. But in dhikr, we don't want to be talking to ourselves because we want to be aware of Allah during that practice. So that's sort of the nature of thought, how it kind of grows, and then how it kind of can be, how you would kind of deal with the unwanted thoughts that you have. So you can catch yourself when you're talking to yourself about thoughts, and then you can just use your anchor, use your dhikr to come back to a state of mindfulness.
And in terms of the practice of dhikr, should I be thinking about, driving down to a beach and just sitting alone for, 3 or 4 hours and trying to be alone with, my thoughts and trying to remember Allah? Or should I lock myself away in the bedroom? Or is there a specific kind of, preconditions and a specific kind of guidelines as to how to perform it and where and when to perform it?
So like I said,
in a formal sense, of course, not in obviously we make dhikr all the time.
Yeah. So I don't think there's anything specific that is prescribed in Islam. I mean, Al-Ghazali has his particular way of saying how we should do that. And then I have kind of my own way that I described at the end of my paper. I guess it depends on what kind of meditation you want. So if you need to do tafakkur, which is to do rational thought, which involves talking to yourself, and you want to go to a beach to get away from things, and that helps you think, it helps you reflect, that's a good thing. That's a type of meditation. That's not mindfulness meditation, but that is a type of meditation. It's just called contemplation. That's good. But when we're doing mindfulness meditation in the sense of dhikr, I prefer to go in my room. I make it dark, I make it silent, I turn my phone off, make sure there's no beeps and whistles or anything. It's never going to be totally silent, if you're living in the city and you hear cars and stuff and people, neighbors. But then to kind of be there quietly, I close my eyes and I just sort of look at the back of my forehead and kind of focus on that point. And then you focus on your breath. The breath is something that you can always come back to, and you can make these deep breaths and breathing exercises. That's going to calm you down. That's really helpful for stress. And then so I kind of get calmed down for a few minutes, and then I start doing my dhikr, and then I start holding one of Allah's names in my head and kind of really focusing on that name. And then the thoughts come up, and I start talking to myself. I'm like, oh, there I go again. Okay, got to bring it back. Astaghfirullah. Okay, go back to the beginning. And then you just keep doing that. Every time you bring it back, every time you use that anchor and dhikr to come back to mindfulness, it's like doing a push-up or doing a pull-up or running a lap. That every time you do that, it makes you stronger. And every time you do it, it's going to be easier to do it when you're not meditating, when you're not doing this type of dhikr practice. So, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And what I suggest is that you can look at sort of general mindfulness stuff. And I think it's easy to see how it overlaps with Islam and to kind of incorporate your dhikrs and your dua into it. And, there's different ways to do it. Some people meditate for an hour. Some people meditate for 5 minutes. Some people meditate for 2 minutes, but that 2-minute kind of stopping and just being present, that can be really powerful for people. So, it kind of depends on each person's situation, and they kind of have to find their own way of doing this that, it fits into their schedule, it fits into their ability. Some people can't sit still for 20 minutes, and they need to kind of work up their practice. So you used to start for 5 minutes, then you go for 10 minutes. And I found out that, I used to do it in 10 minutes chunks, and I would do it and then the alarm would go off. I would do that for about a couple of weeks, and then I would be kind of absorbed in my dhikr and what I'm doing. And then the alarm would just shake me out of it. And then I got to the point where I didn't even set an alarm. I would just do it. And it feels good to be in that state of mind, of mindfulness. And then I would do it for as long as I want, and I'd come out when I felt like it. I'd come out sometimes 25 minutes later. I'm like, okay, well, that was really good, like that. It's a very calming. It's a very, very, very good mental health practice. So this is also related to anxiety and depression. that the mindfulness tools can be helpful for those conditions, and it can be part of a cognitive behavioral therapy as well. So
I wanted to ask specifically, because we obviously have, Islam, and we pray and we, do dhikr and meditate, stuff like that. Like, we're talking about the concept of mindfulness, but we know through our Islamic practices, we can achieve mindfulness. And let's just say, let's just step into an atheist perspective. He'll say that, mindfulness can be achieved. He might not, deny it, but he says he groups all the religions in the kind of one basket. So he says that, if you follow the Buddhist tradition, I'm sure, their practices will allow you to achieve mindfulness, right? And this is looking at the concept of achieving mindfulness. And then maybe if you practice the Hindu rituals or spirituality, you'll achieve mindfulness, and same with Islam and Christianity or whatever. So what would you say from your perspective, right, is there, because, for example, in Buddhism, you have the concept of, they don't really believe in a God, right? So they're just meditating. I don't know what they're like. For a Muslim perspective, kind of interpreting what Buddhists do, I can't really relate, because whenever we do, a dhikr or whatever, we do it with the goal of, pleasing Allah, remembering Allah. So there's like an end goal, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And from your perspective, what do you think is, do you feel that Islam has the best kind of practices in place in order to achieve mindfulness through the, remembering Allah specifically, compared to maybe, let's say, Buddhism, because Buddhism might have a good structure in place when it comes to meditation,
Mm-hmm.
but like someone like an atheist might say, look, you're achieving the same thing at the end of the day, mindfulness, right? But maybe through your research, you've found that, Islam's approach is much more effective and will allow you to achieve mindfulness much better than, say, how a Buddhist or a Hindu does it. Do you understand where I'm coming from in regards to the question?
Yeah. So first of all, I just say that, like, all of the major world religions, they all have, they might not call it mindfulness, but they all are describing this metaphysical reality that deals with the human psychology. So they all knew how thought worked and how they could meditate and sort of gain control of their thoughts. But like we were talking about earlier, Islam is an inward and an outward religion. So yes, the secular mindfulness that's not even religious, that by itself does help people, and it helps their mental health. It helps them be happier and those kind of things. But for us as Muslims, that is not just the end goal in itself. Like, if you just want to be a happy person in this life, then yeah, you can just do mindfulness by yourself. You don't have to necessarily have a religion. But we believe that there is a metaphysical truth that is independent of us, that exists elsewhere. That truth is Allah, and it's in the hereafter and the day of judgment. So it's not only just about achieving this kind of spiritual, I wouldn't say happiness, but contentment, and having control over your mind and being mentally healthy. That's just part of the whole human experience. But we also have to have an outward path that we follow, and like, for us, that's the pillars of the religion. It's the 5 prayers. It's the charity. It's the fasting, right? It's doing the pilgrimage. It's respecting the halal and haram, not doing the haram things that are harmful to you. So our religion provides guidance inwardly, and it provides guidance outwardly. And it speaks to this metaphysical truth that we are going to be resurrected on the day of judgment, and we're going to be held accountable for our deeds, right? So Islam is the whole package, right? So other people, they can take parts of this from Christianity, take parts of this from Buddhism, and they can incorporate it into their secular philosophy or whatever. And sure, they can do that. And it will help them. Mindfulness, meditation and mindfulness practices do help people outside of the religious context, but it's only part of the human being, the part of the human experience that they're dealing with. Like, there's a much larger part that we need guidance on how to achieve a well-ordered society. We need guidance on what should we do and what should we not do. What is a sin, right? How do we pray? How do we relate to the universe and to Allah? And what do we expect in the afterlife? So Islam answers all of these things in a comprehensive way. And that's why I'm a Muslim, and that's why I believe in Islam. But I believe the question that this isn't the first time I've been asked this, but the question that an atheist or somebody else is asking you, they're just focusing on this one part, which is the inner life of the human being. And that's a serious, big part. That's important, but that's not the whole story, because it's not just you. You have to relate to your community. You have to relate to other people as individuals. You have to relate to people in authority. You have to relate to people who are your dependents. You have to relate to people that are in your religion and outside of your religion. And Islam has rules for all of those things, right? And so it's a comprehensive way of life to be able to be guided through this life and into the hereafter. And so the people who are just focusing on only the mindfulness part, they're seeing one part of sort of the greater picture that they're missing.
Those are amazing insights, and I definitely agree, because it's funny, like even I see that as a proof of Islam, the fact that the Quran and the Sunnah tell you to worship Allah, follow the Sunnah, that sort of stuff. And it's not like we're told to pray 5 times a day because it will help you structure your day and will help you become mindful, and it's good stretching from time to time. You stretch your big toe.
Yoga positions.
Yeah, yoga positions. Like, like Rasulullah Sallallahu didn't really, talk about those sort of, aspects. It was always, worship Allah because it's a commandment, right? So whilst, following the Sunnah, you come across these, if you follow the Sunnah to the T, right, you realize there's all these good side effects that happen along the way of that. When you're trying to worship Allah, like it could be, for example, eating less. You feel like more waking. Like for me, personally, like ever since having to work 5 times, going to work 5 days a week, you realize like little things such as your diet actually affect your performance and how alert you are. So following the Sunnah in that regard, eating less throughout the day, smaller portion meals, I've actually started to see the own effects that I'm so much more alert. I don't get tired. When you pray, you have that mindfulness. Like you might get worked up at work, so you need that relaxation aspect, and you really value those moments. So it's funny, like even though we don't do it for those reasons, those are the side effects that just kind of happen along the way of you trying to worship Allah. So
I think there's actually though indications in the Quran, I wonder if you would agree, Justin, that suggests that we do things more than, obviously we're told to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is deserving of worship, but there is kind of that aspect of self-improvement and a worldly end to our ibadah. Like I know in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the 21st, I think it's the 21st verse, is O mankind, worship your Lord who created you and those before you, that you may become righteous.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that allusion to becoming righteous. And then there's obviously in Surah Al-Fajr, O soul at peace, return to your Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect of, and it's often been quoted by people, scholars of the tradition of the inward science and tasawwuf.
The inward science.
And the inward science. Ilm al-batin.
Just say Sufism, bro.
No, I'm trying to avoid the buzzword here. That word can trigger a lot of people.
Yeah, I understand.
But no, tasawwuf is the Arabic word. I mean, there are scholars who've quoted that ayah of the Quran talking about the importance of achieving a kind of peace and a kind of surrender in this life as well. So I suppose that and of course the allusion to becoming righteous. So I suppose that we do have, there are they can be a means to an end in some regard. And I think also one thing that I've noticed about prayer, and one thing that really struck me before I became Muslim, was that I realized that if you only engage in worldly actions, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing so, but if that's your entire life, you will be a very worldly person.
Mm-hmm.
If you connect to a world that is greater than yours, or a thing that is so much greater, and Allah, of course, is the greatest, Al-Akbar. So if you connect to that, then you will be elevated above the kind of the base state of the world. Do you know what I mean? Because you have that connection to the divine. And so that's something that really struck me before I became Muslim. And I think that it was the realization that this, like the Islamic tradition, has in it, before I even recognize anything else, has in it access to something greater than us.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way that it pulled human beings away from worldliness, away from ego, away from themselves, and towards something far greater. And I couldn't work out what that was at that point. I later came to study and realize that that was probably Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that when I noticed that, and when I realized what prayer is, and then I realized that the actions connected with, so if you act in a very worldly way, you might act in a kind of tit for tat, eye for an eye manner, but the highest way is to sort of have that rahmah and have that ability to forgive and have that transcendence in action, because for you to do something. So for example, in Surah Al-Furqan, translated into English, it says, the servants of the most merciful are those when they walk up, when people address them harshly, they respond with peace. So that's an example of a transcendent response, a response that is not the basic response of a human being. Human beings generally, well, you hurt me, I'll hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
You still listen for me, I'll get you back for it. And I think that one thing that really struck me about Islam was not only the fact that it drew you to something better, but that was manifest in every aspect, including the action, including the speech. I wonder if you had that same experience and that kind of realization that when you're praying,
mm-hmm.
you're praying because you are remembering the divine reality. You're remembering the highest of all things, mm-hmm. and you're taking yourself away from the lower things, the physical things.
Just to bounce off you, Raf, sorry, quickly, because a lot of what you said, it reminds me, because I'm actually reading a book at the moment. I've got it in my bag right now. It's called Seven Traits of Highly Successful People.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, it's really famous. It's amazing because what I'm reading it, I'm thinking this is literally the Sunnah, but the way it's packaged, it's for the secular audience. You get what I mean? Like, I feel like it's a shame, like we could talk about all this concepts from the Sunnah, but we just haven't been able to do it in a way where it's palatable for the modern audience.
I think it is to some extent, though. I think that a lot of people are kind of becoming interested in Islam through these offerings. And I know actually we were talking about, those people who are becoming Sufis but not Muslims. I've actually read a lot of blogs of people who start going to these kind of Sufi gatherings and Sufi circles, and then later they become Orthodox Muslims through acquainting themselves with the reality. It's like, because you have to ask yourself, it's like, where did this knowledge come from?
Exactly.
It came from somewhere. All of this knowledge came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It can all be traced back to that. So I guess if you follow the bread trail, the breadcrumbs, you'll end up back at Islam. So I think that there is a growing.
Because even in the book, he talks about why certain businesses become successful and why others don't. And it was kind of bouncing off what you said earlier, Raphael. It's because of this concept of he went deep into values, that what he's observed and what he studies, that the businesses that tend to last actually have proper values in place and keep to it. And we see, especially with my experiences, because I do run like a sort of small business on the side, where by natural, a person who only lives to, for physical means, I guess, like he might be atheist and he just wants to get a lot of money. You can literally, it makes sense to cheat your way through everything, like to rip people off, steal money, charge high amounts of, charge in terms of, products, high amounts than it should be. You could do a lot of cheap stuff, which makes sense because at the end of the day, you'll get more money. But he's saying that there's actually value should be in place. So that's why you see the biggest,
He's basically saying there'll be no barakah in your business.
Yes, well, So it's amazing how it all kind of plays out, right? And you don't see people like that within, the top 10 companies in the world that's, having the mindset of being, really cheap and stuff. They're usually, for the most part, very respectable people, passionate, have values as well. Steve Jobs, even Mark Zuckerberg to an extent.
Bill Gates, they have that philanthropy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's subhanAllah, like how these concepts do kind of trickle down. It's like how Allah makes the world kind of run, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's a point that you guys have brought up that I want to speak to. Sorry, I'm just pulling up this statement. So you were talking about how, we do these spiritual practices and we get benefits in the world, but it shouldn't be about those benefits in the world. Those are sort of incidental to this greater idea of getting closer to Allah and doing what Allah has commanded and seeking nearness to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I want to mention this statement by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, who was one of the righteous Muslims. He said, "Aslihu akhiratakum, yaslihullahu lakum dunyakum, wa aslihu sara'irakum, yaslihillahu lakum alaniyatakum." So he said, take care of your hereafter and Allah will take care of your worldly life. Take care of your private life and Allah will take care of your public life. Right? So when we do these prayers, we do them because we want to do them for the sake of Allah, because they're going to last in the hereafter. But along the way, we're going to get some dunya benefits out of that. We'll get peace of mind, we'll get contentment and things like that. But the intention has to be for the greater goal. So we should be praying and we're doing mindfulness practices and we're doing these acts of worship and contemplation and things like that as a means of worshiping Allah to get to the hereafter. And if we do that, we will get these benefits in the world as sort of the side effect, right? So, and this is related to what they kind of say in modern psychology, is that in modern therapists, they tell you that if you chase after happiness, you will never get it. Like if you were living only to be happy, you will never be happy because it will always be out of reach and you will always become unhappy and you will always lose it, right? So this is what psychologists say now. They say you should chase after purpose, find the purpose in your life, and live your life according to that purpose. When for us, of course, it's to worship Allah. And then happiness is the byproduct of living out your purpose, right? So
So
I hope that makes sense.
No,
right?
I was just even further than that. I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think the point I was saying was that these benefits that you see in dunya, because we do see the dunya, we don't really see the akhirah necessarily now. I mean, so when you see the spiritual benefits that these people have received from their selflessness and from their submission to Allah, it allows people like me to recognize the power of Islam. Among other things, it's one of the signs of the righteous people and of the Muslims. But I think further than that as well, of having the right intention to do it fi sabilillah, one of my biggest qualms with modern spirituality, and I know a lot of Muslims who are into kind of Sufism and esotericism and this kind of, as well as kind of modern spiritualist movements. And one of the things that frustrates me the most about them is they believe that true spirituality is about themselves and improving themselves. And it is. But the manifestation of that spirituality is not necessarily how long you can stay silent for, but in how you treat other people. And I know people who are incredibly meditative in their lives and incredibly disciplined in their lives. They've achieved this mindset, but you can tell from the way they treat other people that their spirituality is not genuine. But there's kind of a gearing towards self-improvement and not societal improvement, and the role that spirituality has. And it's particularly emphasized in Islam. Like we can go back time and time again to that hadith we mentioned at the start, about loving for your brother what you love for yourself. That is the essence of manifestation of a true selfless, obedience to Allah and a manifestation of the inward state of a human being is in that. Not necessarily in the other things, but there's kind of that imbalance that I see in some people, where they're very focused on themselves and I have to improve myself. I have to become disciplined. I have to become have this meditation. Whereas it's not about, helping them. And we know from the Sahabi and the examples that, they would spend their nights in the hospital, with the sick people and the wounded people.
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of and with the poor. And there's a famous writing, I think it was Edward Gibbon, a historian, talking about how one of the Persian delegations came to Umar ibn al-Khattab, and they asked to find him, and they found him asleep on the steps of the masjid with the poor people.
Mm.
And that struck him so much that he wrote it down, and that still lives in the annals of history today.
Mm.
And that's the kind of beauty of the manifestation of Islam that I saw in that sense. But I don't know if you've recognized it in modern spiritual movements and why it's the case, and even in modern Islamic kind of spirituality. But is there this kind of sometimes this focus on the self?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that it's part of the. I mean, I don't know about the rest of the world. I lived in the West. I'm from the West. That there's a trend towards individualism, and there's a trend towards the discourse of rights without duties. So, for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like we agree with a lot. We agree with those ideas. People have the right to life and so on. But they only use the word duties like once near the end as an afterthought. And this was a major criticism of some of the Muslim countries at the time, is that you're talking all about people's rights. What about people's duties, right? So people in the West, or the people I know, they tend to look at things very individualistically, that the individual's autonomy is more important than anything else, and that we don't really have this greater duty to other people in our society. So you have people say, secular people say something like, well, just forget your parents. Like if you don't like your parents, just, go live away from them. You don't have to talk to them. But we know that Allah has told us we have a duty towards our parents, and even if they are idolaters and they strive to make us worship something other than Allah, Allah still says, وَصَاحِبَهُمْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, like to accompany them with good conduct, right? Even if they're bad parents to us, right? So that infects, or that influences the way people view spirituality in the West too. Like they're really focusing on themselves and their own self-development and things like that. And there's a less of a view that I have this greater duty to society, or I have this greater duty to my religion and my religious community and my God, right? So that is a reason we see a lot of strange behavior from people, that it seems kind of selfish, that they are only interested in their own rights. They're not interested in the duties that they have towards people.
That's really profound, and thank you for that insight, because sometimes I think about it, like a lot of things you can rationalize and make sense, but it's like the Quran says the complete opposite to it. So you obviously follow the commandment, from Allah. Like for example, what you just mentioned about following your parents. Like let's just say if you were a person with no values, you'll be like, I don't need to follow what my parents say. I can just like move out and do my own thing. Why do I need to spend more money? Like you can justify not following your parents.
My parents didn't treat me properly. Why do I have to treat them properly? That's a perfectly reasonable, like, rational conclusion to draw, isn't it? But it's not correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Allah commands, even if your parents are disbelievers and stuff like that, you still have to do your duty. So subhanAllah, like it's kind of a deep topic to really engage in. And in terms of mindfulness, I wanted to ask you this quick question, but because you mentioned in your papers before about being aware of Allah, would that also consist of, let's just say, saying things like Bismillah before you eat, like having that, instead of like saying it out of your tongue as a action, is it something that has to kind of manifest in your heart while you, before you eat? Like, is that where, being aware of Allah kind of occurs, when it's like, out of your own sort of love, out of your heart sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of these, we have all these prescriptions. Like we have a dua to say before we eat. We have a dua to say when we travel. We have a dua to say when we enter and exit the house. We have a dua to say when we enter the lavatory, right? And I think all of these are acts of mindfulness, right? I forget exactly how he said it. Al-Ghazali, this was in when he's talking about wudu. He said that like these acts are to train you to act with purpose, right? And by extension to act with mindfulness, right? So we shouldn't just say them mindlessly. They're not just like things that we just say. That like these sayings help us to bring ourselves back to the awareness of what we're doing. When I get in my car and I say Bismillah, right? And then I remember Allah, right? And what I'm doing, like why am I driving, and how Allah has granted me this means of travel, and and maybe this is my last day, I'm going to get in Iraq today. You just never know that, right? So you just need to be bringing yourself to be mindful for Allah and all of those things, and that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had routines, right? He did things specifically, like he did his sunnah prayers. He did things when he's dressing himself, and there's this book, Fortress of the Muslim. It has all these du'as in there. So, I believe the point of all of those du'as and all of those statements of dhikr is to be mindful in everything that we're doing, to help us kind of be mindful in everything that we're doing, so that we're not just running through life on autopilot. That when we're doing our prayers, that we're doing them purposefully. We're always reminding ourselves of the purpose that we do things. So yeah, I think those fit into this greater picture of mindfulness. And mindfulness, by the way, isn't just the meditation. Mindfulness, like they talk about mindful eating, they talk about mindful walking, mindful exercising. You can have mindfulness in every aspect of your life. And I think that Islam teaches us to do that. And I think these du'as and these routines that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam practiced, those are part of that mindfulness in daily life.
And also, earlier in the podcast, you mentioned about mindfulness, where you sort of had the ability to follow or not follow, your thoughts and desires, and you went into the idea of thoughts. Touching on that point, why I bring that up again is that it actually, because I listened to the Russell Brand podcast, it was Under the Skin, and I think episode 1, he had an episode with, I don't know if you might be familiar. He's I think he's an Israeli professor. His name is Yuval Noah Harari, and it was like they had a pretty. Russell Brand brings on some good guests. Like they have some conversations about spirituality and stuff. And the stuff that you talked about, thoughts and ideas and desires and stuff. He, even though he's probably Jewish or something, and obviously he wouldn't know the Islamic concepts of the nafs and all that, but the way he was talking about it, being a professor, being like a proper secular professor in an institution, he mentioned the fact that, for example, he gave an example of homosexual people. He said that, I think it was homosexual people, but he said that whatever thought that comes into your head does not define you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they have this, I guess, what this society is built on is desires to, especially if you're a secular atheist.
If you have a desire, then there's nothing wrong with living according to it, so long as it doesn't harm anyone else.
Yeah, that sort of principle, right? And he's coming along, being like someone in the university institution, saying that whatever thought occurs is not you. So, would you say that these sort of concepts are sort of dealt with, or you've come across personally when you've done your research, in terms of secular kind of academic professors actually talking about concepts in such a way which is sort of Islamically aligned? Because if you do kind of want to package what Yuval said in regards to that idea specifically, it's pretty much the idea of the nafs.
Yeah, the nafs, if you swapped them out, you'd have pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So this also kind of indirectly ties back to mindfulness. But would you say in your own field of study, you've actually come across, secular academics talking about this sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy and different types of psychological therapies. So what you're talking about is the idea that your thoughts are not yourself. Like, we all have bad thoughts, and those aren't necessarily a reflection of us as bad people. They're just thoughts, right? and I have thoughts about myself that, oh, I'm a terrible person, I'm a loser, like nobody likes me. We all have that inner critic, and those are just thoughts. Those aren't like real. Like you may call yourself a loser, but maybe you're not, right? And you may think people hate you, but really they don't. You're just saying that to yourself, right? So this is a concept in what is called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, and what the acronym that they says that the problem that people have is fear, and FEAR. The F stands for fusion with your thoughts. So people have these bad thoughts about themselves, depressive thoughts or anxious thoughts, and I'm a worthless person and people don't like me. They have these thoughts and they've internalized those thoughts as true, right? And that their inner critic, who is very harsh and unforgiving, is telling the truth about them, right? And that if you believe people think you're a loser, you think people think you're a loser, and then you think that's true, and maybe people don't think you're a loser, right? So part of mindfulness, when you're watching these thoughts come up and then you're like choosing whether to talk about them or engage them, is to put a little distance between you and your thoughts, right? For example, people who suffer from anxiety, they do what is called catastrophizing, right? So something happens, something that's not good, and then they start thinking about the worst situation possible, and they go through their minds, and then oh, I'm going to be late to work. Oh, and then my boss is going to be mad at me. Oh, and then he's going to write me up. Oh, and then I'm going to get fired, and then I'm not going to get able to get a job. Then I'm going to go out on the street. I'm going to be poor, and I'm going to starve, and I'm going to die on the street. And it all begins with this thought that, oh, I'm going to be late to work, and it's going to lead to all of these things, and then they go on this train of thought that's really unhealthy. So mindfulness gets us to kind of recognize that process is happening, and okay, I'm late to work, and my boss won't be happy, but I'll do better next time. And you don't get into that kind of destructive train of thought. So and also, as we know in Islam, a lot of these thoughts, they're whispers from shaitan, and shaitan isn't you, right? And I don't know about you, but like sometimes I have terrible thoughts, like, oh, that was a really dark thought. Like,
definitely.
I'm not going to act upon that, and I don't know where that came from, but like that's not me. Like that didn't come from me. Like I don't think that way, or like I don't choose to think that way. People have dark thoughts like that. They come from shaitan, and that doesn't come from you. So you need to. Part of this mindfulness is to put that distance between you and your thoughts. And then it gives you some space to kind of to recognize when you should engage the thoughts and when you should not engage the thoughts, and not to take your inner critic so seriously. Like we're always really harsh about ourselves, and we assume people think bad things about us, or we make a lot of assumptions about people, and those are thoughts. Those are not realities, right? And so I think that's what those psychologists are talking about. This is part of acceptance and commitment therapy. And I've also seen it appear in other contexts as well. I think that's what you were referring to.
Just to take it one step further, let's just use an example. Let's just say there's practicing Muslim, super religious, prays all the time. He might be by himself in a house in a forest, and he's praying to Allah, and then suddenly fitna arrives, and let's just say a lady or a woman, a beautiful lady, kind of tries to seduce. Just sort of tries to.
He's cabin in 3 kilometer radius, and she has to stay there.
And somehow she seduces him, right? So taking that kind of situation and examining it, we can for that guy, he'll be in a situation where his nafs will be playing. He wants to do the act because it's enticing and that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, being aware that he's slave to Allah, he's going to try to deter away from that act.
Mm-hmm.
So in that instance, we would try to not let our nafs dictate us, right? So we're trying to be, I guess, in control or transcendental. I'm not too sure. Like above those feelings and those kind of desires that want us to do the act, right?
Mhm.
So that's also somewhat, I guess, connected to mindfulness, because you're aware of the thoughts that are occurring, and being aware of it means that you're not going to disobey Allah, right? But at the same time, would you say that that being, or that part of us that is aware of those feelings and desires and the nafs, that part of us is our consciousness? And would you say that, being, practicing, doing the practices of Islam, and that, like praying and getting close to Allah and dhikr, would that be a way for us to kind of purify ourselves, so that we're getting close to the fitra, so who we really are as humans? I know I've really said a lot, but would you say I'm kind of in the right ballpark when it comes to these concepts?
There's actually a thing called transcendental meditation. It's like a massive thing now. Tanzim's just anointed himself as a famous yogi, practitioner of yoga right now. He's got all the...
I wouldn't recommend that you pay them money to teach you how to do that, because you can learn how to do that by yourself. Like it's not difficult. So it's a business. Anyway, so let's go back to what you were saying about the nafs. So Al-Ghazali talks about the nafs, and your nafs has different parts. Like you have nafs rabbaniya, like you have this sort of divine, not in the sense that you're part of God, but you have this righteous part of your soul, and then you have a predatory part of your soul, and you have a lustful part of your soul. That's all part of you, right? And the predatory and the lustful parts of ourselves, the gluttonous parts, is about desires and things like that. That is part of us, but that doesn't make up our identity. Like it's a part of us in the way that your arm is a part of you, but your arm isn't your identity, right? It's just a part of your body, a part of your being, right? And what you really are is a soul, a ruh, right? You're really a spirit that is living inside this body. So, and we have different desires that conflict. We have a desire to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to follow his commands and worship him and everything. And then we have a desire to do these really base animalistic things, like fulfilling our lower desires and committing adultery and doing things like that. So, the dhikr is a way to encourage the righteous part of the soul and to sort of to keep the other parts of the soul at bay. So Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentioned the analogy that he uses is that your heart is like a mirror, right? So when you're doing dhikr, you're polishing the mirror, right? And then the divine is reflected out through you. So the more you do dhikr, the more the righteous part of your soul is going to take over, right? And you're gonna have more control over the other parts, right? There's also a hadith, like in a Surah Al-Mutaffifin, right? Because they had ran, or they had rust or dirt over their hearts because of what they did or what they earned, right? So the hadith that goes with this, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that when you do an evil deed, it puts a spot on your heart, right? And then you repent, and then that spot is kind of cleaned away, right? So the heart is, and we were trying to come on the Day of Judgment with qalbun salim. That's the only way you can be saved on the Day of Judgment. You come to Allah with this pure heart. So the dhikr is like the main way that we're purifying the heart, right? So we're earning good deeds as we do the dhikr, and we're getting control over those lower parts of ourselves, right? And then when we go out and give charity, this is helps purify our heart. When we are angry, and then we hold our anger back and we forgive that person, right? That's polishing our heart, and doing all those good deeds polishes our heart. So if you think of the mirror, the mirror of your soul, like it can be covered in sins and spiritual diseases and envy and greed and all of those things, love of the dunya, miserliness. There's all those like spiritual diseases. And then all of the good deeds that we do in Islam, like dhikr, dua, reading the Quran, contemplating, giving in charity, doing our salat, all of these things all purify the heart. And so, like the other hadith says, that the servant grows close to Allah. This hadith Qudsi, the servant, paraphrasing, the servant grows close to Allah by doing the fara'id, or the obligatory acts, and then the servant grows even closer to Allah through the extra voluntary acts until Allah loves him, and then he hears with his hearing, he sees with his seeing, like that, right? He's doing the will of Allah perfectly, right? So you grow close to Allah through the basic obligatory practices, and then you do the voluntary practices, and this dhikr, the mindfulness thing that we're talking about, is a voluntary practice. And doing dua for 20 minutes in a day, or for some time part of the day, that's a voluntary practice. You're not obligated to do that, but it's highly recommended. You should do it. So all of those extra things, in addition to our basic things, all of those act to purify the heart in some way. So when you give charity, that weakens the greed in your heart, right? Your greed and your mindfulness, you want to hold on to this wealth, and the more that you give in charity, the weaker that greed becomes. And then also, I found this really helpful, that if you are really hating somebody, and not hating them as in like hating their evil actions, but like you really like are malicious and you want to harm somebody, and you like wish that they would go to hell,
Wow.
That's yeah, seriously. I mean, that's
Donald Trump.
A disease.
Donald Trump.
Well, that's a disease of the heart, right? You shouldn't really have this malicious intention towards people. Even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Allah to forgive the people that struck him, like during the Battle of Uhud, right? So you make that dua for that person, right? And that you really have to swallow your pride to do that, and that's not an easy thing to do. And you really hate somebody, but that hatred is harming you, right? And in order to cure yourself of that hatred, you have to make dua for that some person. Oh, may Allah guide that person. May Allah forgive that person. And you just let that hatred go, right? Because that hatred inside of you, that's harming you. It harms you more than it harms them. So all of those ways are ways to purify the heart. And again, this is a whole comprehensive part of the religion. Like it's not just one practice. All of these practices build up upon each other, and then it builds towards that the purifying the heart, and being a righteous person, like to yourself and to others, and intending to meet Allah in the hereafter with all of these good deeds. And then when we do that, then the world will take care of itself.
Would you say, I'm just throwing it out there because we're talking about a lot of, inner dimension concepts about, stuff like mindfulness, all that sort of stuff. Would you say that the biggest proof of Islam, or like the number one proof, is the fact that we follow the Sunnah, and you'll start to see effects on a spiritual level that you can't really explain, if that makes sense? Would you say that is the number one sort of proof of Islam?
That was one of the points I was kind of alluding to before. It's like how you have to have those kind, like when you see the benefits of practicing Islam in people in a worldly sense, like seeing that does become a proof. And I think it was actually a thing of Hamza Yusuf anyway. I think he said that our hujjah is not in books, it's in the people who manifest what those books are teaching.
Yes. So I wrote a paper called "The Case for Allah's Existence" for Yaqeen Institute, and it was reviewed by my colleagues beforehand. So when I originally started that paper, I was leading with sort of the logical, rational proof. This is a cosmological argument. This is the teleological argument. Here's just some amazing facts in science that kind of point to the universe has been designed. I was leading with those arguments, and then one of my colleagues was like, well, you should start with the fitrah, because I was sort of like tacking the fitrah on at the end, which is important, but really that's what brings people to the religion and keeps them in the religion, is that this religion fulfills their fitrah, or their human instinct, right? So, and this is what Al-Ghazali says as well. So when you are practicing the Sunnah and you are being guided by it, and you're seeing the benefits over and over and over and over again, and it's meaningful to people, and it gives purpose to their life, that is what brings them to the religion and keeps them in the religion. And that is subjective, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, saying, "Oh, it's subjective." Well, yeah, it is, because each person has their own inner experience, and that isn't necessarily objective. It doesn't make it not true. But there are objective arguments for the existence of Allah, like the cosmological argument and the teleological argument and so on. But really that it's if you follow the religion, it will purify your heart. Like it will guide you. Like, and that's how it is for me. Like, I'm so happy. Alhamdulillah. I'm so fortunate that I have found this religion because I feel so guided by it. Like, and by the Sunnah. And then that's why I have this hadith website where I'm posting these hadith. These are powerful lessons. Like, when I was growing up as a Christian, I mean, I had good values, alhamdulillah, and my parents taught me really, really good values and morals and things like that. But there were kind of like specific things like, like backbiting. Like we didn't think of backbiting the way that you think about it in the Sunnah, like, and things like that, things that have just helped me along my entire life. Like, every success that I had in my life, alhamdulillah, came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because I was following the guidance of this religion, right? And for me, that's why I feel so grounded in my faith, is because I have experienced it and it's meaningful to me. And I didn't come to the religion because somebody say, hey, have you heard about the cosmological argument? Have you heard about the teleological argument? Have you heard about these things? That doesn't bring people to the religion. That will help people who are confused and they need to square this away with their rationality. But it's really the inner esoteric, personal, meaningful part of the religion that is the biggest proof for Islam. And then also just experiencing the Quran. Like I was, not too long ago, I was reading the Quran. And I was just fascinated by just the perfection of the words, like the linguistic perfection of the Arabic, and just how amazing the text is and what it's saying. Like that's a subjective experience I had, but that for me makes me feel firmly grounded that this Quran is the word of Allah, right? Because of these amazing words that came. That it doesn't sound like a human being talking, right? When I read it. So I would say it's about the fitrah. Like Allah created us to believe in Him. Allah created us to accept this way of life and to be guided by that, right? And that's the fitrah that keeps people in the religion and keeps them straight upon it, right? And when that fitrah is corrupted by some kind of external ideologies and confusing ideas and things like that, and that's when people are led astray, right? Because they don't see how the religion kind of fits in with their innate nature, right? And that's why people have a problem with it. But I think that's really the key, is like getting back to how does the religion fit in with your human nature, and how it all comfortably fits together. All the puzzle pieces snap together, right? In this religion.
Definitely.
If that makes sense.
I can definitely sort of understand where you're coming from, and I can definitely relate. Even for me personally, to be honest, I actually did come to practicing the faith through Zakir Naik videos, so it might be a different situation with you. I just love the way he destroyed the Christian arguments and stuff, so I'm like, yeah, this is definitely the haq. But besides that, like during that time as well, I remember I was in like year 11, year 12. I was the type of guy that would want to impress the people around me, try to gain everyone's recognition, try to impress others, and that sort of, like it feels good in the moment. It's not the type of the sweetness of Iman, obviously, but however, I remember every time, like I would love to be around people, but when I go home, or if I'm by myself, or if I'm going to sleep, I remember I can still have that feeling sometimes, in terms of when I'm trying to remember my younger days. I can distinctly remember that emptiness in my heart. Like I can never kind of get rid of that sort of lingering feeling, because it was so strong. like I'll just be so empty, right? But when I came to the religion, I wasn't seeking a way to kind of get that fulfillment. I was just kind of like, okay, this makes sense. I'll have to follow it. This is definitely the truth. I believe in it, right? But then subhanAllah, like like a few days ago, I was reflecting upon my past and also my present. Like nowadays, like the amount of, I don't know, it's this sweetness of iman that you taste in your heart when you're, by yourself, that you can't really explain. Like when after you've prayed, or even sometimes at work, when I've prayed and I've got a bit of a lunch break, I've got like 10 minutes to go. Sometimes I'm like sitting on the stairs, kind of looking out at nature, just reflecting. And subhanAllah, like the feel, I can't explain it. It's like Allah kind of, takes your heart and, fills it with happiness. And I can't really explain it, right? But it's that feeling that I've sort of acquired whilst doing the practices of Islam without really seeking it, if that makes sense. So it's for me, that's how I know Islam's the truth. Like now, before it was like, Zakir Naik made some sick arguments. So, but now, like subhanAllah, like actually experiencing those metaphysical concepts of taqwa, iman, that feeling of the heart, the sciences of the heart, you realize that even though people do say it's subjective, I know, like, for example, one example might be tariqas where, they tell you to do a certain action of dhikr or whatever, and you do it and then you feel X experience. It's because the person's actually done that his whole life and he knows what will happen. So even though, I guess people say, feelings is subjective and this and that, but at the same time, when you look at someone and you're like, he's happy, you know how he feels because you know how it is to be happy. So I don't know, within that subjectivity there's objectivity as well.
Yeah, there's also the discussion of something that I wanted to mention before about states, how the human being has different states in Islam. That's correct, right? Like the scholars have kind of identified the different, is it maqam like there's a different kind of
there's a couple terms for it. I don't remember.
Hal ahwal as well. Yeah,
well there are like
but
states
no, it's
of being, there are like states of being that are like temporary, and then there are like stations. Like you can't get to one station without getting to the next.
Yeah, that's the one. The ahwal are the states, and I think the maqams are the stations. Right. Someone please correct me on that though. Like if someone wants to put that in the comment section, come and smash me. I am not the most versed in my Arabic and in my tasawwuf technicalities, but I'm good at alliterations though apparently. But yeah, I think there's that kind of understanding of you start off as a person in a particular state. Say you've just been a club promoter. You're used to swindling people on the side.
Swindling? What's swindling?
Like
you're making words up.
Like no, it's a word. It's like swindling is like like pulling a dodgy. Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to rip people off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
These kinds of So there you go, Tanzan. It's kind of like you have that kind of life, and then you say, all right, I'm going to change. I'm going to transform into a spiritual person. And it's not like the individual will sit there and then tomorrow he's like a wali of Allah, like he's just floating on a cloud. It doesn't really work like that, does it? It's kind of like you have to make the progressions. I remember the first time I tried to meditate, I sat there for about a minute and a half, and then I just completely, like, I was like, nah, that's it. I can't concentrate anymore. I've got this to do. And then as you practice further, I think, you talked about it earlier on, as you practice further, and all of a sudden you forget time exists for a while. And it's like that with spirituality as well. It's not something that you some people might have those instant transformations, and there's certainly scholars of the past and sages of the past who did have those kinds of transformations.
It's just like Allah says in Surah Ibrahim, it's like Iman is like a tree. So like it starts with the seed, right? You have the seed at the very beginning, and then it grows into this huge tree. So it doesn't grow overnight. Like you don't become this great spiritual person, doing everything and practicing all the sunnahs and being so righteous. Like you have to build up to that point. And when we look at like the righteous predecessors and, mashallah, they prayed in the night, they prayed a lot in the night, right? Well, they had to build up to that point, right? You start praying in the night a little bit, and then they would start to enjoy it. And then they would have this regular kind of practice. So yeah, absolutely. Everyone's
well, I know that if most of us, if we started praying in the night right now, half of us would get sick because we wouldn't be used to it. We wouldn't be used to being awake at night. We'd probably
like even when I first prayed, like in general, it wasn't easy. It was like, what am I doing? I've got other stuff to do. But
it seems, and then
you sort of kind of
have to do it for a while. Your fard becomes just a part of your day. It's so cemented.
But like at the same time, it gives you start seeing the inner dimensions of a human being whilst in prayer. You get that stage of really achieving perfection in your prayer. Then you realize, oh wow, I'm in a different state of worship. So I guess through ritualistic actions over time it
becomes more, and it's the same with spirituality, because they're both intertwined, the ritualistic aspect and the state of the person, because it comes down to the ability of the person to sort of focus on that action. I mean, someone who's distracted in their life, and you talked before about distraction as well, someone who's generally distracted generally can't focus. They're not going to be able to do ibadah properly. The same way someone who has that focus, has that discipline, and has that balance in their life already.
Right.
In that sense, it's certainly a sort of it's a journey, and it's it's a ladder.
Sorry, I was saying, it's
my
muscle.
bad.
It's literally a muscle in your brain, right? Like the more you do it, the more mindful you are. It builds up white matter in your brain. Like it changes your brain. So it's meditating. People can't just go do it for 30 minutes if they've never done it before. I mean, I remember when I was meditating, it was really difficult to do 10 minutes, right? But if you stick with it, it's like jogging. I used to run cross country. So the first part of the season, when you're not running, it's just awful. It just feels terrible, right? And you have to do that for a couple of months. But then by the end of the season, you're just cruising. You've got a runner's high. I did the 5K in 21 minutes. I was so proud of myself. Alhamdulillah. But
Alhamdulillah.
I can't do that anymore. But it builds up. It builds up like that in your brain. It's the same thing as your body.
Yeah, I don't imagine there's many marathon opportunities in the desert in Dubai. Imagine that the cross country would be pretty rough up and down the sand dunes. I'd say. Yeah. But no, it's absolutely, and it's the same way. It's also I also tend to think about it as at the moment it's no secret I've packed on quite a few pounds of late.
This is why it's a podcast. Yes. We don't go video yet.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. I'm waiting. Wait for me to cut it down, and then you can see me. I've got to get myself ready. No, it's. I've certainly put on quite a bit of weight, and trying to run now is particularly difficult. Trying to do anything really is particularly difficult. But I know that, for example, if I were to jog a little bit every day, lose a little bit of weight, and everything becomes gradually easier. And I'd say that there are so many ways to compare it, but it would be the same with our spirituality and with our deen and with our iman. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is like the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the most beloved deeds till are small or are regular, even if they're small. And I was reflecting on that hadith as I was reading a book called Atomic Habits about how to change your habits. And he says in that book that you just focus on the small changes. If you're flying an airplane and you make a really small course change, over the long term, it makes a big change, right? So his idea about habits is, just focus on making small increments of progress. Don't think about the long term. Just focus on doing the small things. And it just reminded me of that hadith about how Allah loves the deeds that are regular, even if they're small. So if you're just doing one sunnah prayer every day, but you're really good about doing it every day, then it becomes easier to do two. And then it becomes easier to do them all. And then it becomes easier to pray in the night and to do any kind of other thing. Like if you're changing your diet or you're trying to exercise or you're trying to read the Quran more often, all those things. If you just start small and regular, and then over time, it builds up. And that's how you build up a good, big, strong habit. It's not by making big steps. It's by making small steps.
SubhanAllah, yeah, definitely good insights for the audience in regards to really upping our spirituality, because we know in Islam it has the answers. It's about comes down to us, comes down to intention. I was actually listening to, this was a while back actually, Joe Rogan podcast with Firas Zahabi, and towards the end he brought up, he talked about philosophy, I think Laplace, and he said, because they were trying to talk about the idea of free will and predestination and how you can kind of reconcile the two. And Firas Zahabi brought up, I think Laplace, how he explained it is that there's a pool table and you have, obviously the balls, and how he explained it is that we make the first shot, which is the intention, and if you hit your shot, we'll know where the rest of the balls will end up if we do, through mathematical calculations and that sort of stuff. So I can actually use that example for us here, is that it comes down to intention, and inshallah, we follow the right ways of how Islam sort of says how we should do our practices, we can, inshallah, reach a certain state. I've actually got a sort of curfew to hold by, so we might have to wrap up soon.
Okay.
But regardless, what did you have? Did you have any ideas, thoughts you want to share in regards to what I just said?
Well, I hit all my points that I have here in my notes, alhamdulillah, so thank you for that. Since you mentioned free will, I just have to mention the fact that I wrote an article about this for the Yaqeen Institute. It's called Reconciling the Divine Creed and Free Will in Islam. And that illustration about the pool point that you thought that's an interesting way to think about it. I said everything I wanted to say. I'm really glad to have talked with you guys. I hope it's beneficial, and I hope that people listening will benefit from it, inshallah. And just thank you very much for having me on. It was my pleasure.
It was blessing having you. Thank you, making time and coming on Boys in the Cave. So we've actually enjoyed this conversation. I don't think we've had a proper spirituality.
No, I think that was the first time, and we literally said straight away at the beginning, it's not something that Muslims really talk about much. I mean, it's kind of neglected. And I was thinking about the episodes we've done, and we haven't actually done an episode that relates to this yet. And we've had over a quarter of a century now, haven't we?
Yeah, quarter. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for that. And I think that was, there was so much there for our audience to unpack. I'll probably have to go back and listen to this a couple of times and to really get the most out of what you shared with us today, because it was very deep, and alhamdulillah, there's plenty there for us to.
We're deep in the cave.
That's it. Yeah, we're right in the cave. So generally, with all our guests, we like to ask a parting question, and that is, if you were to be trapped in a cave for an indefinite period of time, and you could be trapped in a cave with 3 people, it could be anyone except for the Prophet ﷺ and Sahabi, because everyone would choose the Prophet ﷺ and Sahabi. But who would you choose to be?
I can't choose
in this cave.
Sahaba.
No, I mean. Okay, we'll let
we'll give leeway for one. It's because we do Sahabi. Ask no Sahaba as well, so we get an idea of other people that may have influenced
people might want to refer to or listen to. Yeah,
we'll give leeway for now.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 1, I think Mufti Menk. I really like him. He's
he's a great man.
Yeah.
I would say my best friend from high school, Andrew, and my wife, of course.
Okay, you should be pretty disappointed.
We've had so many male people. No one said their wife. They're like the first ones.
You've shown up all of the male predecessors on this podcast who are going to be now berated by their wives for not choosing to spend time.
No, I didn't mean that, but I really mean it. Alhamdulillah.
But yeah, thank you for coming on board. Inshallah, people can really benefit from our episode. If people wanted to check out your stuff, can you just name your social medias, or if you have any, or even links or websites that you may have?
Yeah, so my website is abuaminailyas.com. I'm the father of Amina, and Ilyas is the Muslim name that I took, but I still go by Justin Parrott too. So if you can find me, my secondary website is Daily Hadith Online, and those link to my Facebook and my Twitter. So you can find me on there. And then I think if you just Google Justin Parrott Yaqeen Institute, you'll see a lot of my works and videos come up. And all of those kind of will point back to my Facebook. But my Facebook is sort of my main social media handle. So you should be able to find me that way.
Actually, on Facebook, you can favorite the person that you want as your top priority in terms of seeing the posts. You're actually one of mine, and I always get these hectic hadiths that you kind of post every day. So I always follow that, alhamdulillah. So keep up the good work, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, great. I'm glad.
Yeah. I've been following for years now.
MashaAllah. Thank you so much.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming today. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook. And you can follow our journey through Instagram. Please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes, as that greatly helps us. I mean, as you guys can probably notice, our audio quality is a lot better. So as you can see, your donations are definitely helping us, and you can help us further by going on patreon.com/boysinthecave. So from our special guests, Justin, Raphael, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.